All right. So, good morning, everyone. Happy day after Memorial Day, right? So hopefully everybody had a good long weekend, maybe did a little real estate, or just relaxed and had some time with your family, right? Or friends or whoever, people.
Or both.
Or both. All right, today, as you can see, we're going to talk about forms you may not know. So these are kind of a spattering. I didn't know what else to call it because it's kind of a spattering of different forms that I think are useful, but maybe you don't know about and don't use on a regular basis. So let's start with the first one. Reminder of important dates in a purchase and sale agreement. One of my favorite forms. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this is that this to me is okay, this is what I think the dates are form. If you have a problem with this, you need to tell me, right? Like that's the way I would use it. So I fill it out and say, okay, obviously this is name of the buyers and sellers, buyer's agent, seller's agent, that property offer date. And you'll notice here, though, that it says the dates referenced below are not intended to alter or amend the purchase and sale agreement. In the event of a conflict between the dates listed below and the agreement referenced above, the agreement does control. So this is not a binding document, but it is hey, this is what I believe the dates to be. And so, you've got dates. You got binding agreement date, you've got the earnest money date, option money, diligence period, appraisals, all the dates, right? Like you can put a date for freaking everything. And then you, at the bottom, you indicate copies of this went to all these people, including the lender and the closing attorney, which I think is important because that way you make sure that everyone's on the same page. What I think happens a lot of times is that we think, oh yeah, buying agreement date was such and such, due diligence ends such and such, and that date comes and the other party thinks that it's the next day, right? So I think that filling this out and sending it around to everyone and saying, hey, if you have any issues with any of these dates, please let me know immediately so we can make sure we get that resolved. These are the dates per the contract, per my understanding, something like that, right? Does that work?
Okay. I did not know the form existed.
Hey, I found one.
To confirm the title, I used an email to the other agent saying, hey, this is what I believe. I never thought about sending it to everybody until it was confirmed.
So I like to send it to everybody. I think you should send it to everybody.
No, I'm saying until it's confirmed.
You can wait for it to be confirmed, or you can, just be confident that your dates are right. Because here's the other thing. If you send it to the lender and the closing attorney and they both think it's okay and you think it's okay, that's 3-1, right? So, I mean, to me,
we should all be able to read the
contract. I believe that you are comfortable enough in reading the contract and knowing how to count days that you can put the right dates on this. And there shouldn't be, I wouldn't say that for everybody. No, absolutely not. Which is part of the reason why I like to do this. Because so many people don't know how to count days. Like I can't tell you how many times. Like people are like, haha, due diligence ended yesterday. No, that's actually tomorrow. It's and people trying to be slick and all kinds of things. And then those are the ones that usually don't understand how to count the days. And so there's always that. Any questions about this one? All right, moving along. We're gonna go through pretty quick because most of these are pretty simple. Notice, this is, again, probably a lot of times you just send an email, which is okay-ish, but it's not really proper per the contract because without this bottom section down here where it says signature, you're not really giving notice. You're informing someone, but legal notice requires a signature. So this form is what you would use to give notice on just about anything. Anything you want to give. Now, what you'll note is the next form is a notice to unilaterally extend, right? So this is another notice that you probably are familiar with, I hope. I hope you don't have to use it very often. But unilateral notice to extend for 8 days. Now, here's the fun part about this one. If you check, like if the buyer does this, extends the closing, and they check B. Did we say B? Yeah, mortgage lender's not ready, right? They check B and turns out it's just they don't have enough cash to close. Is this valid? It is not. So you, just because you can fill this out, and then, so I'll tell you, I was looking through and looking at the notices and different things, and there is a notice to unilaterally extend the right to inspection period or inspection period. I was like, what? It's not due diligence. It's if you do the, like, think old school, those of you that have been around for a long time, there used to be a right to request repairs, right? That had an inspection period. There is still a form that is a unilateral extension of that inspection period, which doesn't apply to hardly any contracts unless you put in the right to request repairs portion into the contract, because it's not in there.
Are you bringing that up?
No, I'm not, because it's not relevant, really. Like I found it, I was like, oh, well, I don't remember. Oh, now I see what we don't want to use
Got
this.
to delete it.
But so, I mean, it's still relevant because some people do still use the right to request repairs instead of due diligence. If you think about it, that's a stronger contract in a multiple offer situation. What if I just ask for right to request repairs, but I don't do any due diligence? Now, there's a reason why right to request repairs went away. It's because the argument of what needs to be repaired is a question. But you know, it's an option. All right, notice to withdraw offer. How many times have you seen or used this? Once? Okay. This is a one that you should have in your quiver of tools here, because if you, especially as a listing agent, if you get in a situation where you countered a buyer and then you get another offer, that's amazing. You need to immediately send this, right? So that you have the option of dealing with the new offer.
It's exactly how I.
And that's probably the most likely case, because typically, you know, buyers have due diligence, so they don't really care if they get caught with an open offer. They just kill it afterwards. But with this, as a seller, you need to be able to kill a counter, and the only way to do it is this. Again, I didn't copy and paste the signatures. It looks the same on all of them, but that signature on the bottom is the key point to this. All right, moving on from notices. How many of you use the estimates? Anybody? I feel like this has fallen out over time, and I question whether it would be helpful to have in the real world, because it lays out everything. Now, you as the agent might not be able to fill all this out for the seller, right? But if you give it to a seller and you fill in a couple of things here and there, like this present loan expense payoff, I'd probably leave that blank, because you're probably not going to know. But then the cost of the sale, you can fill in most of those things, right? Credits, you could theoretically calculate taxes or whatever, and then give an estimate at the bottom. But then if you give them this, they're going to have to think about all these different things, right? Oh yeah, I've got my accrued interest, I've got my second loan. You know, they're going to pay attention to that. I think from a seller's perspective, it's just a nice to have. Same thing with the buyer, estimated cost of the buyer, down payment, taxes, loan, commissions, notice commissions is on the buyer side, all these things. So now here's the other thing. When would I use this in a transaction? I would use it at the beginning. So you start working with a buyer and you sit down and go over with them their process, right? You're educating them on how to buy a house, or you're educating a seller on the sales process. This should be in your education packet, because this is a really nice job of laying out 99% of the possible things that might come up cost-wise, which is one of the major things for them to consider, right? So you think about, and you could even go through and do kind of a fake one with a buyer from the standpoint of, okay, we're going to buy a $400,000 house. Let's pretend we're going to buy a $400,000 house, and you can rough fill through, okay, it's probably going to be like this and this, and according to your loan pre-approval, and just go through and fill it out so that they have a general idea of what they're going to get or what they're going to have to pay. Now, the reality is we as agents push this off onto the lender and the closing attorney, right? And then when do they see it for the first time? Because the lender gives them a couple pieces of information, but the first time they really see it is when they get that preliminary HUD or ALTA or whatever the hell it's called. That's what, maybe a couple days before closing, if we're lucky. Now, if they don't understand something and something really freaks them out, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with panic at the last minute for no reason. And so I think if you use these two forms early in the process, then you have a much better shot at making sure that everything goes smoothly and there's no surprises. Because I think that's the number one thing that causes people stress in a transaction is when there's a surprise. If there's no surprise, then they shouldn't have, the stress level should be lower. Does that make sense?
Working with first-time buyers currently, a lender who we all know actually used an example.
And did this.
And did this.
And that's
as
good.
part of, what it would be if you put so much down versus this,
Yeah.
or mortgage insurance versus no mortgage. So I just filled in a little bit more information that there's these other.
Right, there's other costs that the lender may not have included. Right. And so, and this is a really good way of kind of telling, here's the difference between buying a condo and buying a single family house, right? So here's the HOA difference, right? You got $400 a month or $400 a year, right? Like those are your two different, now what does that do, right?
Plus the lender has prepaids.
And the lender prepaids and things. And so a good lender is going to do a lot of this. But again, we don't always control who the lender is. So we kind of go with that, right? Kind of work through that. All right. Earnest money transfer to the seller. I actually could have used this form last year when I was selling my parents' condo, because this is exactly what, well, it's not exactly what we did. We made it into option money. But this says that the seller is holding earnest money. Now, this is one of those forms that you probably didn't know exist. But to be honest, you probably don't need. Right? I just like throw it out there because it's a weird one. I can't think of a situation where I would want the seller to hold earnest money. The only time I've ever really seen that is new construction. Occasionally builders would be like, oh, I want to hold earnest money. Which to me is silly because I don't want to hold earnest money. as a brokerage, we try to hard not to hold earnest money just because the liability of it is a pain. Earnest money is the number one thing that gets people in trouble. So if you didn't have to hold it, it would be great. But we do because, of course, it's part of the process. It's what we do. But I think that's an interesting conversation. So literally all this does is transfer the money from presently held holders escrow account to the seller. And then of course, there's a bunch of language about holding harmless. And that the broker, this is one of those forms that's heavily protecting the broker, which is you as well. We have no responsibility. Once the earnest money gets deposited with the seller, not our control, right? Like if you're supposed to get it back and they don't give it back to you, that's between you, not me. I don't have it, right? So that's part of a lot of that, the refunds. It talks about the refund and how it should be done, but again, you're relying on someone that is not beholden to any real laws or regulations to hold earnest money. I think it's kind of a bad idea in general to go from there. So
What were the circumstances when you thought this would have been?
so I converted earnest money into option money, which this does not do. Because I wanted the earnest money to be non-refundable. They wanted an FHA exhibit signed, and we wouldn't sign it because it was a conventional loan when we went under contract. And so in order to make them get their FHA exhibit signed, which they needed to close, we agreed that if they would convert the earnest money to option money, which meant that it was ours, then we'd sign it. And so that way, because that balanced that risk. Remember, the contract is always a balance of risk. The risk was on them to not close. And we were at that point, we were getting the earnest money if they didn't close. By signing the FHA, you now take away and you shift that risk back to the seller because the FHA, as we know, goes through closing. So things to think about. Well, that was it. I just thought we'd do some fun ones since it's right after a holiday and do a quick, I know, right? Record time. Much like my bike ride to work this morning, record time.
Personal best.
Personal best. But I thought I would do a few just kind of interesting ones and end on one that's a little bit different and probably not one that you're used to seeing and really shouldn't see. Please don't use this unless there's some weird situation that you would need to. I guess I could see needing this if you had earnest money with us on a previous contract that fell apart. We were holding the earnest money still over to the new contract. And in the new contract, the builder decided they wanted to hold it and you were okay with that. Maybe. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with a reason why this form exists. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for coming and sharing in our wonderful, fun GAR forums today. We will see you. I think we're again nothing next week, or is next week's sales meeting? I always get confused. Anyway, we'll see you in the next class. It's on the calendar, and we'll go from there. Talk to you later. I can find my bar here. I guess I could do this.